My name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast.
Thanks, Norm. It's an honor to be here, and it's been fun to work with you over the years.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. And today we are thrilled to have Alan Lotvin, doctor and CEO and co-founder of Sequel MedTech.
Great. Well, nice to see you and glad to be here. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So for all of our listeners and viewers that aren't as familiar with Alan's background, Alan was a practicing cardiologist before moving into the world of executive leadership in healthcare, leading Medco Health Solutions as president of their specialty pharmacy, was also CEO and president of MC Communications, CEO of Care Clinic, CEO of iCore Healthcare, all before leading CVS Caremark as president of their specialty pharmacy business, providing coverage for more than 100 million lives, driving enterprise growth, and the largest pharmacy healthcare provider in the United States. Alan's passionate about making the healthcare system easier, more affordable, and convenient for people who rely on it. And Alan today leads Sequel MedTech as CEO and co-founder of an early stage company developing the next generation of transformative drug delivery advancements. Learn about today challenges facing the diabetes community, especially as it relates to employer-led benefits, and how Alan and his organization is at the forefront of revolutionizing the space. So really excited to jump in and learn about you, Alan. So first question is, what inspired you to become a doctor and why cardiology?
This is going to sound like a little bit of a pat answer because I get asked it a lot, but like people say, when did you know you wanted to be a doctor? And it's like when I could understand what my parents were mouthing at me in the crib, right?
Was there encouragement that led you in that direction?
Exactly. A lot of encouragement is a gentle word.
Okay.
But obviously at some point I became a sentient adult and was making my own decisions. But I thought there was a really interesting opportunity in medicine to combine science and doing something good in the world and, being the child of parents who grew up in the Depression, having kind of stability. So that was all sort of attractive. And cardiology sort of arose for me because it's a very active sort of specialty. Like I was an interventional cardiologist, so we would actually, would do things, right? So, there are some specialties where very cognitive, especially when I was training, like neurology was a great puzzle. And I love solving puzzles, but the problem with neurology is when, especially back in the, 80s and 90s, when you solved the puzzle, there wasn't much to do. People would love, like immunology was just at its starting, which was, again, this incredibly complex relationship. Cardiology was sort of simpler, but you could actually go in and fix things like, and I would joke with people, if it was fast, you slowed it down. If it was slow, you sped it up. If it was open, you closed it. If it was closed, you opened it. And so I ended up becoming an interventional cardiologist, and I did, thousands of procedures. Those procedures were still new, so it was like a technical skill. It was just great. It was immediate gratification, right? You saw a blockage, you fixed it. Became pretty clear to me after 10 years of it. I practiced for 5 years, but angioplasty really was only about 10 or 11 years old, and it became clear to me that in the late 90s, 97, that a lot of angioplasty that I was being asked to do probably was unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really feel comfortable doing that, right? And I couldn't figure out how to maintain a referral practice and not do something I didn't feel good about. And I didn't want to be a general cardiologist. And I always had a really kind of business bend. And at that time, I sort of got excited about some other things and ultimately left practice. And my friends were really surprised and went and did something different.
Well, now, and over the last couple decades, 20 years plus, you've done it at scale, and helped probably way more people than if you were, simply treating patients day to day.
Well, that's interesting, Norm, because I knew I traded huge impact on 1,000 people a year for much less impact on
hundreds
at that
of million.
time 30 million. Now it was 180 million. But and that was a conscious decision because when I left practice and I went into pharmacy, it was because I was really fascinated by the ability to use data, right? And I thought that I had done some consulting work with friends, and that was the early beginnings of population health management. And We called it big data back then. Like it wasn't, anything else. And what really attracted me about pharmacy in particular was that it was both a real-time database and it represented what actually went into the body versus what people wanted to get paid for. So I thought it was really a clinically robust database. And so that's how I got into pharmacy. It was sort of a little bit random. And once I got into the PBM industry, I found that I really liked the nuances of it. I liked the idea of like lowering the cost of healthcare, and I was pretty good at it, so kept doing it.
Love it. Walk us through your experience and learnings as president and CEO of iCor, which is now a division of Magellan.
Yeah, so it was interesting. Going back to Medco a little bit, once I realized I didn't want to be a clinical doctor in business, I wanted to be a business person. I sort of raised my hand and said I wanted to get some client experience. I moved out to work with one of our large clients, was there for 3 years, raised my hand and said, hey, you know what? I want to learn about manufacturers. So I came back, did that. And then we built a specialty pharmacy. And so when I joined iCor specifically because they knew something about something I knew nothing about. I knew a lot about specialty pharmacy at that time, and specialty for your listeners are drugs that are 10,000 to now $2 million a year. When I started, it was 1% of the drug spend. Now it's 50%, and people go, Alan, how did you know it was going to grow so much? And like, depending on who I'm talking to, I either say because I'm a genius, or I tell the truth, which is I didn't. I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I figured out that I was in the right place and rode that wave. But so iCor really knew a lot about oncology, and oncology was particularly complex from both a clinical perspective, a financial perspective, systems perspective. So I really wanted to learn that. So I was there for 4 years, and I learned a lot there about two things. One, about oncology, and the other part was about um, entrepreneurship. So Medco was a giant company, and even though I started the specialty pharmacy there, I started with a ton of help, right? And iCor was a much smaller company, was started by some really, really top-notch entrepreneurs. And within iCor, we started our own little sort of business within a business that ended up being successful. So I learned a lot about kind of entrepreneurship at iCor, which I then brought to CVS Specialty and ultimately to being the president of the CVS Caremark. So it's just everything sort of a progression.
That's fantastic. I love that you mentioned, like, hey, it just happened. It wasn't something you planned for and it just happened opportunistically. Interestingly, similar story with myself. People ask me all the time, Norm, like, how did you know digital health was going to grow so exponentially? And like, how did you get, kind of entrenched in that market in the early years before it was really like a true category? And I wish I could say I'm a genius and I knew it was going to happen and this was all my plan. But I'll be honest, many people know this. I'm not ever shy to share this. When I prospected Livongo for the first time, 9 years ago plus, I thought they sold to hospitals. So I was prospecting them because I'm like, oh yeah, Lee and Glenn, like they came from Allscripts. Some of their other executives are from the healthcare IT world. I assume they sell diabetes management to hospitals. And then when Jim Pursley called me and said, hey, Norm, I need to hire 10 commercial people to health plan. And I'm like, oh, the other 8 selling to providers? He goes, no, they're selling to employers. And he explained what that meant and gave me a shot. And, fast forward 8.5, 9 years, and now that's all I do. So it's kind of funny how sometimes opportunity falls in your lap. But hey, if you're talented, if you're ambitious, if you're, willing to learn, you can make a huge impact, even in an area that you weren't necessarily targeting to start. So when you led CVS Caremark as president through 2012 to 2018, driving their PBM strategy, new business development and relationship management plus retention, what were you most proud of, and what were your greatest learnings from your time running CVS?
So my career at CVS was the first kind of five years were specialty, right? So, and the thing I think we did there, first and foremost, was we really recruited an amazing team, like an amazing team. And many of them are still there in even bigger jobs. I
I'm a
think the
big
second,
believer in like recruiting top talent, really making a huge impact. So I will agree that's crucial.
yeah, I mean, like you can't do this stuff by yourself. The second thing that I thought we did that was good is we really built a very balanced growth strategy. And I was sort of proud of the fact that we set a strategy in 2012 and it's still the strategy for specialty. Now, the tactics change every year, and that's the good thing about a balanced
Yeah.
strategy where you have different areas to grow in. I think the third thing we did that was good is we were able to identify opportunities early, right? And so things that were going to grow really fast. And sometimes it was a simple decision. It was like investing in a sales force in hepatology before all the Hep C drugs came to market. I mean, everyone knew they were coming to market. We chose to invest in that. And I think at one point we had like a 50 share there. You
Hmm.
know, we did some work in the 340B program that ended up working out very well for hospitals. It worked out, very well for our payer customers as well. And again, it was like we were early in that. When I took over Caremark in 2020, it was, during the pandemic, and we sort of tried to apply the same lessons. Like, what does the team need? And what I sort of sat down with the team first is we sort of said, what are the big questions we've been trying to answer for a while that have been swirling? Because usually one of the things that I learned in people talk about doctors being bad business people. I don't know that there's over good or bad. I think doctors often struggle because you're socialized in a manner that makes you very good as an individual contributor, particularly people like you're doing procedures. But what I do think was a great piece of training in my medical career was the ability to make good decisions under uncertainty, right? Because you can never know everything about a patient. We just don't know enough about the science. So you're always making a set of decisions that are sort of a risk benefit discussion, a recovery decision, right? If I get this wrong, how bad is it? And like I used to do stuff that could literally kill someone. So you sort of think about the world that way. So it allowed me, when going through the process, like, okay, it's been swirling for 2 years. Why? Because we didn't make a decision. Oh, we're going to make a decision. If we got it wrong, we're going to fix it.
Hmm.
So that was helpful. I think the other part that was really interesting about the presidency at Caremark was it was during COVID, and sort of figuring out how to connect authentically with people this way
Hmm.
versus, holding their hands and shaking their hands and having dinner with them was, for both colleagues and customers, was a challenge. And I think we were particularly successful in building that culture internally, of transparency and kind of risk taking and a willingness to like acknowledge if you make a mistake, it's okay. We'll fix it. But like you got to tell me about it. And I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't, humble brag and say we had unbelievable results for 3 years running Caremark. It was great. Like, when everything's going well and you're winning business and you're growing the company,
Everyone's
it's
happy
fantastic.
when it's up and to the right.
Exactly. It's like, those are always fun times. And again, we had the same thing. We built a great team. We promoted a bunch of people. We gave people really rich, rewarding jobs and let them do it, right? It's Steve Jobs' line. Like, I don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. Hire smart people and let them do the right thing. And you create the air cover for them. You allocate resources appropriately. But it was great. I had a great time.
You mentioned something, and I'm going to share a hypothesis. And I come from a family of doctors. Like, I'm named after my grandfather was a doctor, my uncle was, a doctor, my, cousins, my sister's doctor, like many doctors in my family. My mom's PhD in nursing. Like, so healthcare has been in my family forever. I would argue when you said like, hey, doctors sometimes aren't great business people. I think there's some that are fantastic. There's some that aren't good at all. And I think the common theme that I've noticed that I think is really important is what makes a great entrepreneur and business leader is, being able to not necessarily be the smartest person in the room. Surround yourself with a lot of smart people. Delegate, I think just the way doctors are treated is partially why it's not setting them up to do great in business. Because think about a doctor, like patient comes to the doctor, you know, doctor, what they say goes.
Yeah,
So
you want to be the expert, right? No, I agree
they
with
want
that.
to be the expert, they want to be the smartest person in the room. They're used to being the smartest person in the room. And then they move into business in an area they have not been necessarily trained. They don't have a ton of experience in it. They probably didn't get an MBA in addition to getting a medical degree. That's just too much time on a college campus. So we start thinking like, okay, all these inherent disadvantages. And if that person isn't willing to take advice and be very vulnerable and like raising their hand when they don't know something and, really kind of throwing their ego out the door and like being a learner again, those are things that kind of go against everything they've been taught to do for sometimes decades. So again, I don't think it's necessarily always, hey, doctors, tend to have these things. It's like also the environment they're
Oh no,
put in,
I couldn't agree more, Norm.
how
I think
society
doctors
like
can, yeah.
treats them.
No, I think you're 100%. I think doctors can be great business people because ultimately being a good business person is making good decisions. I think the
Mhm.
problem is what you're articulating is that the socialization of doctors is such that it requires really an ability to, it's almost to be, Einstein used to talk about approach things with the naivete of a child, right? So you
Yeah,
have to go in and say, I'm not gonna assume I know everything. Like for a while, I used to carry two different business cards. One said MD, one didn't.
yeah.
The first people would call me Dr. Lotvin. The first thing I would say is, I'm calling you, James, you're calling me Alan, right? Just like little things like that make a real difference in how people in the reception you get.
In most cases, I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but in most cases, doctors have to decide things unilaterally, like bucks stops with them. And usually they make a split second decision just based on the own information they have. And then that's how they make decisions. I would say most great business people make decisions, as a group, like gets multiple stakeholders involved and like it's a lot of collaboration. I don't think doctors are taught collaboration, in medical school and in residency. So it just goes against a lot of the things they were trained to do and just kind of unlearning certain behaviors and kind of remembering like what probably made them successful to get into med school to begin with, or get themselves through med school or themselves through residency or an apprenticeship. So I think it's just a unique thing. And I invest in early stage companies, and if there is a doctor, CEO, and founder, it doesn't turn me off, but it also does make me think, okay, let me really index on, can this person collaborate? Can they take criticism? Can they really leverage a lot of different stakeholders and get everyone to contribute, to the main goal? So it's definitely something I geek out on personally. There's been a tremendous amount of innovation in the PBM space, like with some of these like antitrust lawsuits, some of these PBMs or employers kind of like breaking fiduciary duty when it comes to, pricing of certain drugs. What do you feel the future of PBM in the world of pharmacy is going to look like over the next decade or two?
So a decade or two is a long time in this business, right? But what I'll tell you is right now the PBM industry is under a tremendous amount of attack, and we can spend hours talking about that. What I'll tell you is that the people I've worked with in the industry for 30 years wake up every morning and say, how do I make healthcare more affordable? That's what
Mhm.
they think about every day. Yes, they're capitalists. They have shareholders. These are companies that make 3.5% margins. So um, I think when the industry has been looked at in the past objectively by the government accountant, the GAO, on two occasions they said, yes, the federal health employee program has spent hundreds of millions of dollars less because of PBMs. I think the other thing that gets lost in the mix here sometimes is, you know, the purchasers of these services are the biggest companies in the world, right? To think that like the PBM is tricking Microsoft, right? It's kind of silly. And there's a whole group of very experienced consultants like who know the industry, who are helping make decisions. And then finally, the other big customers are health insurers who clearly understand this. So these are knowledgeable purchasers who are saying, yes, maybe I don't love everything about the industry. Like I don't love everything about my car, but I still drive it. But on balance, the benefits outweigh the risk. So I think the industry is going to continue to exist. I'll point out one other thing. I think it was 2018 or 2019. There were a whole bunch of pharma executives that were put in front of Congress because they were complaining about rebates. And they were asked specifically, if rebates went away, would your prices go down? And it was like the tobacco laws. No one raised their hand and said, of course it. So if you look at the drug spend in the United States, and I can do this for a while, so we can shut up if you want, but like
No, I love
over the
it.
last decade, if you look at the national health expenditures on pharmaceuticals, it's up 3%. 3%. That's a lot less than almost everything else. A lot less than
I would
college,
argue hospital,
everything, right?
expenditure is growing at a much higher
That's
clip.
right. So, but that's factual. Like the national health expenditures, that's factual. It's equally factual that if you talk to people and say, what's the biggest problem you have in healthcare? It's drug costs. So how do you square those two things? And I think there's two things that contribute to that. And again, like everything else in life, nothing is that simple. So one thing is that the cost of new drugs is just astronomically higher. When the first really effective monoclonal antibodies came to market, in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were priced at about $1,000 a month, right? Same drugs are now $7,000 to $8,000 a month. I mean, they're biosimilar now, but the comparator drugs are that same 8,000. Oncology products, $150,000 a year. Gene therapy, 2 or 3 million. So that's one factor, right? Just the average unit cost.
I would totally agree in that if the smartest minds in the country aren't incentivized to like potentially find cures to some of the most horrible diseases known to man, and it's easier to build wealth to like build a social media platform as opposed to a
Oh yeah,
life-saving drug.
I'm not complaining about it.
Where's the smartest, talent going to go? It's going to go where companies are investing, the most resources and time.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not making a value judgment on it. Again, to your point, if we want innovation, we have to invest in it. But it's just factual. The price of new drugs has gone up. So if the price of new drugs has gone up like a substantial amount, how come the overall costs are only 3%? And the reason is the deflationary impact of generics. From in 2007 or so, about under half of prescriptions were generic. Now it's 90%. Now, the other thing that happened is that the plan designs, like people are responsible for a greater percentage of under the kind of high deductible plans, the idea of having people have skin in the game to make better decisions. We exposed people to the true cost of drugs. We can keep two things in our mind. Overall drug costs aren't horrible from a societal perspective, but from an individual, it's horrible. And we have to, so when you think about it that way, you come to a different set of solutions. But your question was, I do think the PBM industry is going to continue because it creates value and reduces costs in aggregate for payers. It
Mhm.
it creates negotiating leverage with pharmacies and with PBMs. What it looks like, what the business model is. I mean, the business model has evolved 4 or 5 times in my 25 years in it. It's going to continue to evolve. And what it's going to look like, I don't know that I can tell you right now, mostly because I don't know, but it's clearly going to evolve.
I don't know if it was you personally in these meetings or there were some, people that reported to you that were in meetings, but like when a large employer, let's say Microsoft, was negotiating with CVS Caremark on their, PBM contract, I would assume like Bill Gates and the like CEO, CFO of Microsoft might not have been in those meetings. It might have been like the benefits leader, benefits consultant, and then but like usually, if I'm not mistaken, the CEO and CFO are probably not on those negotiations. I would argue that's part of the issue, personally, where the employer market's super appealing because there aren't a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to decision making. The benefits manager wants it to happen. If the benefits consultant gives their sign off and it doesn't disrupt a whole lot in the carrier plan design, usually a vendor can get in pretty quickly because it doesn't have to get vetted by multiple layers of management. But at the same time, that potentially is more difficult on some of the bigger negotiations, carrier negotiations, PBM negotiations, as opposed to like a small point solution, added to a benefits package. So I'm just curious, did you ever have negotiations with big Fortune 500 customers where like the CEO of the company or the CFO actually was involved in the negotiation for the PBM
So it
contract?
was definitely the rarity, and I think a lot of times what would happen was that the benefit consultants, it was always a competitive process, right? It's all like they run RFPs, they bring the 3 or 4 biggest PBMs in, you make your pitch, and you put your best foot forward. You start talking about a lot of different things. Ultimately, it comes down to price, and price, and then what we used to talk about a lot was people would leave your PBM over service, right? So if you had service issues, but they would choose you over price. And again, the benefit consultants really understood the nuances and were very, very good about about really getting the best price for their clients. My sense is that usually the CFO knew about it because it was a big enough line item, but it was uncommon for them, not never, but uncommon for them to be directly involved in the negotiations. And as it was uncommon for me to be directly involved, right? Because we would just basically, you got to the point where you were like, all right, I need a little bit more here, a little bit more there, and we would do the analysis of can we afford to manage this very complex client at this rate.
Yeah, and I know dozens, if not hundreds, of just tremendous benefits leaders out there in the market. Just in general, those departments are under resourced. So I would argue they could, for some of their bigger negotiations, use, a CFO or a CEO in the negotiation room.
That's fair. But I do think that the consultants though really understand this market.
Yeah, they
And
know
if
uh,
you're a Fortune 500 company, you're getting, the senior partners in these firms.
for sure. 100%. So tell me what caused you to start Sequel and, what about your experience at CVS Caremark kind of gave you the inspiration to, start a very early stage company and you left a huge job to do it.
Yeah, so the biggest reason I did this, right? So I really enjoyed my career through the PBM industry, and like I said, I feel like I have to wake up in the morning, look at myself, and go, I feel like help lower the cost of healthcare, and so I feel good about it. I left because I had spent 25 years in big companies, and I had built a couple of different businesses or products within other companies. And I have a sort of very entrepreneurial bend, and that I think it helped me be successful in a large company. It also helped me be a challenge in large company. Like people would be like, I was just obnoxious enough to, or just successful enough to not get fired because of my obnoxiousness. Right? Like able to titrate
Yeah,
my
no,
success to obnoxiousness.
the advantages outweighed the
Exactly.
disadvantages. You always,
But so I'm friends with one of the leading biomedical inventors in the world, a guy named Dean Kamen, and Dean had developed this really unique device, which was really the first new piece of insulin delivery technology or drug delivery technology 20 years. And it does something remarkable in that it's the only device that directly measures how much it gives every time it fires. And it was such the science of it and the technology of it was just elegantly beautiful. And having spent enough time in Caremark to understand what a big problem diabetes is and a growing problem, right?
yeah, it's only
Unfortunately, it
getting
is
worse.
getting worse. So it felt like a great opportunity to both make a clinical difference, to build a company, which I really wanted to do, but also to get much closer, to get back to my kind of roots in science and technology. One of the things I did in cardiology in 1999 was we invented a mitral valve repair device. And that was really, really cool to be involved in that. And it's now being commercialized. It's great. But I really missed that exposure to science and technology. So working with Dean, I get a ton of technology and the stuff that he does. It is mind-boggling what goes on both within DECA, but also something called the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute, which is kind of the center for building new organs in Manchester. So that was one part. And then the second, one of our other co-founders is a guy named Pablo Legoretta, and Pablo started a company called Royalty Pharma. But Pablo has this incredible access and interest in the deeply in science. So we spend a lot of time looking at what other drugs could we put into this device, and we talk about, the mechanisms of action and what would be continuous infusion versus, episodic infusion. And there's so much going on in this little ecosystem of these two guys that just it's incredibly mentally stimulating. That was the reason that I decided to go and do this. And 27 years in big companies is I love it. I had a great time. I learned a ton. I made a ton of great relationships, but it was enough. It was
All
fun.
right. Well, I'm happy you took the leap, and we're excited to follow your company's progress. Talk to us about how Sequel is on a mission to reshape diabetes care. Like diabetes care was kind of the first or one of the first areas that was really disrupted by technology. Some of the first early digital health companies included Omada and Livongo and Virta and countless other, companies that have attacked this market. What is SQL doing that's, just wildly different than anything else out there?
So I'm going to answer that two ways. So first on the actual technology. So the diabetes technology market, you're right, has been around for a while. And up until about a year ago, it had been sort of a slow single digit growth market. Now the ADA came out with guidelines saying that, AID, automated insulin delivery systems, should be the delivery system, should be the treatment of choice for anyone who's insulin dependent. And that sort of accelerated the growth of the market from mid single, we'll say it, to mid double digits, right? Teens. But from our perspective, when you look at an AID system, it's got three components. It's a sensor, continuous glucose monitor, an algorithm, kind of the controller that tells the delivery device what to do, and then the delivery device. And like any system, it's only as good as its weakest link. And
Hmm.
so for a while, that was the sensors, algorithms. And now they're good enough so that we have really good systems on the market. But even with good systems on the market, there's a huge unmet need. How do I know there's a huge unmet need? Simple. Only 40% of people who should be on these devices are. And of the ones who are, anywhere between 5 and 15% change devices every year. That tells me there's unsatisfied need. So Dean was actually the original inventor of the first commercial insulin pump. He invented it. And that story is an amazing story. I
Hmm.
can tell it to you if you want, but he made this pump, and it ultimately got sold through a couple of companies to Medtronic, and it's now the Medtronic 780G, and it works, great outcomes. And what Dean realized in 2010 or so, he always thought that there was going to be at some point kind of the external artificial pancreas. He thought it would be 10 or 15 years after his first pump, but the sensor technology took a lot longer. So in the 2010s, he sort of realized, oh, you know what? The sensor technology is getting better. Let me rethink what should a pump be? What should an insulin delivery device be? And he invented literally the first new delivery technology in 20 years. And it's like I said, it measures to 50 nanoliters, 50 billionths of a liter every time it fires. And it's
Hmm.
just, so that's fascinating. So the technology and the major clinical benefit in the early stages is going to be the fact that one of the big problems in people using these devices is they get either something happens in the delivery and insulin doesn't get delivered when you think it is. And that results in high blood sugar. And it's a much bigger problem than people realize. Like hundreds of people a year in the US get either hospitalized in an ICU or die because of this.
Yeah,
And
yeah. My grandma had diabetes. My uncle has diabetes. My cousin has, yeah, I've seen it up
so
close.
this
How
device,
and
right,
how regimented you have to be to stay on top.
exactly. So because we measure how much insulin we give every time, if we gave zero when we expected to give some, we know there's an occlusion. So we will alarm in our it's called the IFU, the instructions for use from the FDA. We'll alarm up to 9 times faster than anyone else. That's clinically relevant. So that's that part of the technology, and there's a whole bunch of other things which I won't go into right now. The second part, and this is very relevant to my experience at Caremark, is if you're someone using these devices, depending on which device you're using, you could have up to 4 different entities that you're getting stuff from. They don't talk to each other, they don't communicate with each other, and you're sort of on your own to be the system integrator of your own health. And you just mentioned how much people have to stay on top of it. So what we want to do, and this gets to the SQL sort of connect idea, is create a much experience for people living with diabetes to reduce the burden
Hmm.
of the disease. So one way of reducing the burden is giving you the confidence that when we tell you insulin's being delivered, it is. That's what I said a minute ago. The second way is just simple things. Like I know we'll talk about digital stuff in a second, but just a really simple thing. When I send you a box, it's basically gonna have everything you need in it except insulin and the sensors, right? So we're trying to like simplify that whole process and then creating a digital interface. Our device is connected real time to the cloud. So if you have an alarm, if something goes wrong and you call us, we will actually know exactly what the pump is doing. We don't have to have this conversation of, well, is the button green? Is the button red? Like, is it making this noise? What's the error code? It's like, oh, we see what's going on. Like, you must have put a little air in the system. You need to change your cassette. Like, we'll be able to tell people, or conversely, no, your pump is working fine. You need to look at your site or something else. So we're really trying to create much more of a wraparound experience for individuals and then extending that to the employers, right? Because, and this gets again directly to my experience at Caremark, it's a hugely expensive space, right? And if you look at most of the companies that are out there, most of what they do is large population, we'll call it coaching. And it has a role and it has a value. The tongue in cheek, I would say, coach, if you're insulin dependent, all the coaching in the world is not going to make you non-insulin dependent, particularly if you're type 1.
Yeah.
Maybe some type 2s. The people who are insulin dependent actually have the highest healthcare costs of the diabetic population. So what we're saying is, I'm not trying to replace Livongo. What I'm saying is, like, if you like those solutions, great. Now let me show you what you need for this smaller percentage, like maybe 10, 15% of your patients living with diabetes. And by getting them onto an AID system and getting them sort of tuned correctly, in 1 year, you will reduce your total cost of, it's obviously better care, but people won't be hospitalized. People won't, go to the emergency room. Like, there are just a lot of issues that you can avoid. And then there's the long-term improvements in health and welfare,
Yeah. And
or health
also
and
like mental,
wellness.
because going to the ER and getting put into a medical coma, like those are not good outcomes, and like they're not easy to bounce back from. So I think it's really important to remember, like, even if it's a small percentage of the population, these are still human beings and people that like need to show up to work Monday through Friday and be productive employees. And if you're having like a very, very rocky health journey, how can you be a great spouse, parent, friend, colleague at work? It just, you can't just look at these things in a vacuum. So I really,
Remember, a
really,
substantial number of people who are using insulin will have an excursion on the high side every month. And that creates, you got to go through a process. Is my device working? Is my site where okay, or did I do something wrong? And that's mental effort, right? You got to say, oh, my site feels a little wet. Should I go to sleep now or should I change my site? It's a full-time job. If you ever spend time with people living with diabetes, it's a full-time job. And what we're trying to do is create a better system. So, look, we're never going to make it go away, but can we kind of make it, like, even if something as simple as, you know what, this pump is waterproof. You can go in the shower with it. You can go swimming with it. It's like things that you and I don't think about. For women, if you if you want to be discreet about it, you have an infusion set. You can hide your pump anywhere and you can move it if you're not, like, for guys, it's easy. We always wear pants. Like, we put in our pants and our pants have pockets. We put in our pants pocket. You don't have to worry about it. You can wear it, but you don't have to. For a woman, it's like, okay, well, today I'm wearing a nice sleeveless dress. I may not want a lot of stuff on my arm, so I can put it on my belly. I can hide my pump in my bra. I'm wearing a blazer. Great, easy peasy lemon squeezy. And you can switch it easily. So those parts of life are, if you don't live with diabetes, you don't think about it. But I spend a lot of time talking to people with diabetes. We have a lot of people in the company who live with diabetes, and this is important. And I feel really good about helping to bring this stuff to market.
yeah, it's fantastic. And I know a couple of people who work with you. Big fan of Stella Zoe, as well as Chris Cole and Vu Van.
Yep,
So you've
rock
definitely
stars.
pulled a handful of people from the digital health space over to SQL, and I know they're doing great work. So what's the future for SQL MedTech? I think it's still in the very early years, but kind of walk me through like where SQL is now and where you expect it to be,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4 years from now.
So I was employee number one on June 1st of 2023. Technically, the company got formed a year before, but that we really kind of launched. We have all of our FDA clearances, and we're charging towards a launch of the product first quarter. We're incredibly excited. Like everyone's doing a ton of work, and that's going to be a launch into mostly into the traditional physician market. Most likely, we're going to try to do this in a way that makes it simple. Again, the goal here is to get people on AID. I'd much prefer if it was our AID, but I think just to do things actually the best way, I think we're going to be a little less branded than people might expect. We want to expand the market for AID systems. We think we have the best one. We think people will choose us, but if they don't, that's okay. They'll eventually come around to us. We want to create additional levels of support, like as I mentioned. You know, my background in specialty pharmacy, you know, we had a service of 1.2 million people with chronic disease that we were part of the care team. So what we're trying to figure out with you know diabetes educators and other clinicians, where's the right place for us to be in the care team, and what are the right tools to provide to both individuals living with diabetes and our care teams to create the greatest support for patients without becoming, we're not going to run a virtual endocrine clinic, right? You know, but there may be stuff, there's something on that continuum which is still being defined, but we're not afraid of doing probably a little bit more because of the background of the folks like myself who've been running care delivery.
And you mentioned like employer launch late 25, early 26. A lot of the companies, that were your predecessors in the market, the Omadas, Livongos, Vertas of the world, not only did they sell to employers, but they also really, went into not only commercial health plans, but also, Medicare, Medicaid as well. Will Sequel MedTech also focus on selling to the healthcare payers as well?
Yeah, I think so. We're broadly trying to solve problems for customers.
Yep.
I think obviously there's the employer market, which is one market. There's the health plan market, and then even the health plan market, there's fully insured and self-insured. I mean, to me, the sine qua non is if we can demonstrate sufficient in-year savings to become part of the fully insured benefit, that's like not a rubber stamp, that's a stamp of approval because they have so much churn in that market. You really need to be quick. I think it makes much more sense for employers can look out 2, 3, 4, 5 year horizon, and then for smaller employers who are self-insured, there's the TPA routes, whether it's the large employers or traditional TPA. So we're looking at all of those different routes for the right way to get. Importantly, this device is going to be available on the pharmacy benefits, so coverage is easy. There's no big out-of-pocket upfront costs for the payer or for the patient. So we're just trying to reduce those barriers.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the company started in 2023, which, was not too long ago. I think there has been a lot of changes in the market just with like the explosion of GLP-1s. So how do you feel, that very unique change in landscape impacts Sequel?
Great question. So I think the story in GLP-1s, I think for type 2, it's probably reduces or slows the progression to requiring insulin. So I think GLP-1s will definitely reduce the incidence of people progressing to being insulin dependent type 2 if people can stay on it long term. And that's
Mhm.
always a big if. In type 1, the science is still being developed. It looks like concomitant therapy with insulin and GLP-1s, the insulin requirement, but doesn't eliminate it. So I think they're going to be an important part of the treatment protocol. Whether in type 1 it's dual formulations or dual chamber pumps, still to be seen.
You mentioned that with employers, Sequel is really going to focus on the, highest cost, highest risk patients. Just out of curiosity, general ballpark, I'm not going to, write this in stone, but of the patients you're recommending employers, use Sequel for, how many of those people will be percentage wise type 1 diabetics and how much would be type 2 diabetics in most cases?
That's it.
Generally, 60, 90, 10.
I think early on it's probably 80-20 type 1,
Mhm.
right? Because even though there's so many more type 2s, first of all, our indication in 2025 will be for type 1. We're doing a clinical trial in 2025 to get an indication in type 2. So we certainly won't be selling into the type 2 market until 2026. So early on it's going to be mostly type 1. I think also the most type 1s or many type 1s see an endocrinologist. Most type 2s do not. So there's also the issue of how do we build a support or help support primary care doctors who generally maybe are a little less comfortable. And there aren't enough endocrinologists in the country to see all the type 2s who would be. So we have to figure out that some of those systematic issues as well. And again, I don't have an answer for them yet, but they're on our radar screen. We think there's a lot of interesting opportunities.
Again, I know company strategy can change in a moment's notice, especially at a company that, is as nimble as you are. But at the current moment, current plan, is the goal to go really deep in this one specific, like super high cost, super high risk area? Or over time, is the plan to be able to manage an entire diabetes population?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think right now we're really focused on the utility on bringing AID systems to more people. Initially type 1, and once we finish our clinical trial type 2. So I think we're going to stay focused on that mission. I do think there's the current crop of coaching solutions and GLP-1 solutions. I don't see a huge unmet need there, right? Where they do see a huge unmet need in the AID space. Where we'll probably start to look for other areas is other drugs, right? Because this delivery technology is very, very well suited for a lot of different use cases, but certainly anything where I can measure something and adjust the drug dose in response to it. For example, Parkinson's, right? You could measure tremor. Well, wouldn't it be interesting if I could titrate drug dosage to tremor, right? Less tremor, less drug, more tremor, more drug.
Any other examples you can share that's not like giving any secrets away to anyone who might be able to try to duplicate?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The limiting factor there is that when you look at what sensors are really available, there aren't a lot. I think the reason there aren't a lot of sensors is that there's not a lot you can do about it, right? Now that we can start to think about these closed loop systems, one of the things that, I have my business development guy doing, he thought he was being hired to go out and talk to pharma. I'm like, no, first you can do that. You also got to go find every sensor company. Every company is doing biological sensing, and we got to understand what they're doing and what disease state and what the therapies are available are. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in those areas.
That's fantastic. Really, really exciting. I ask everyone who comes on this podcast, how do you practice what you preach? Daily, myself, you spend your whole day in healthcare. You talk it, your friends are in it. Mostly, I'm sure you have a lot of family in healthcare as well. How do you, in a very high stress job, both when you were president of a public company and now like running a company that with not a ton of people, if you're not doing your job, the company goes nowhere. What do you do to reduce stress and, stay healthy and allow yourself to work at, top levels?
Number one is surround yourself with a great team. That we don't have to do everything. I think from a health perspective, it's very clear. The best thing any human can do is move, is exercise. So I'm pretty disciplined about exercise, and I either run or indoor cycle 3 to 4 times a week.
Are you on the Peloton?
I don't do the Peloton. I have a really cool bike. I don't own stock in Garmin, but the Garmin Tac X bike. And what's really cool about it is they have an app on your iPad that has real motion videos, not animation, and you can bicycle through France, you can bicycle through Korea, you can go around New Zealand, and it's and the hills connect to the resistance, and if you go
That's
over
cool.
cobblestones, it feels like it's really it's fun. I really enjoy it. And so I use that. The other thing that I use for aerobic, and again, I have no relationship with this company, is a device called Morpheus, which is a chest strap EKG monitor that really helps you do zone-based training if you're into zone-based training. And it sets targets for you every week and every day based on, it'll change your zones, whatever. It's a great device. I really love it. And I also think that people need to, as you get older, I'm a little older than you. Strength training is incredibly important. So I strength train 2 or 3 times a week, and then I try to do at least, you know, something that involves balance. So that's either, hiking in the woods in an unstable surface or yoga as many times as I can fit in.
Yeah, one of my favorite core strength building exercises is a stand up paddleboard. So, my parents have a nice cabin up in northern Ontario that's about 8.5 hour drive from where we live down in Cleveland. But, anyways, when we go up there, like I get on that thing for 20, 30 minutes and I'm exhausted. And then I get back, like, and I start playing golf and I'm like playing great. I'm like, like, I wonder what's going on. Just my balance and core strength so
Yep.
good, it like keeps me stable. So it's a good one. And then I also think, what we put in our bodies is probably 80% of health, approximately. So what healthy recipes do you or your family make at home that might inspire someone to try something new that they've never thought of before?
So it's a good question. So we're mostly vegetarian, partly pescatarian.
That's how I eat as well. I haven't had like meat other than like bite here, bite there in like years.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I don't, yeah. So I think kind of our one of our favorite recipes, well, like my favorite recipe is eggplant parmesan. That's my wife makes it great. We have another great recipe. It's gigante beans, the Greek gigante beans, and so you basically cook them
In the
in a,
red
in a
sauce?
well, so it's really cool. So it's sort of a recipe. You cook them in a pressure cooker, then you do like a lot of carrot and onion, sort of sautéed, then a little bit of tomato, like maybe a lot less than you think. It's not really a tomato sauce. Ton of black pepper. We put Calabrian chili peppers in as well, and then a lot of black pepper, oregano and dill. Then pour in the beans, but with their cooking liquid. So then the
Hmm.
beans should be cooked at this point, but with their cooking liquid, put them in the oven and bake them for 2 hours. The beans get really creamy. The tomatoes, a little bit of tomatoes that you put in with the bean liquid makes a tomato-ish sauce and a ton of black pepper. And you serve it with, I don't eat a lot of bread either, but you serve it like you should, supposed to have some bread, cheese. Oh,
Sourdough if possible, because that lowers the glycemic
yep,
index.
exactly. Cheese. So usually a pretty sharp cheese like works
Pretty
well.
bad.
And then
Yep.
olives. And it's spectacular.
And don't skip on the olive oil. That's good for the heart as well. So
Exactly,
again,
exactly.
thank you so much. Might ask you for the recipe. I think butter
Happy
beans
to
is like
send it
one
to
of my
you.
favorite plant-based protein sources. And anyone who hasn't tried them, highly recommend. I will get a recipe out to the group in no time because I make butter beans probably at least once a month. So again, Alan, really appreciate you joining us on the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast. Myself and all our listeners and viewers are very excited to see what Sequel MedTech does over the next couple of years. And congrats on all your success and excited to see more.
Norm, thank you. I really appreciate the time. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.